When football fans think of the New Orleans Saints, immediately coming to mind is both Drew Brees and Sean Payton. This quarterback and head coach duo helped rebirth the franchise, but what many fans forget is the 10 years prior to that was an absolute roller coaster. And you'll see why as we're about to go through a decade of chaos, wasted potential, distractions, a brief moment of winning, and a storm that almost ended football in New Orleans. Our story begins in the middle of the 1996 season.
After a great deal of thought, I have decided to resign today as head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
Jim Mora decided to quit a day after losing to the Carolina Panthers and going 2-6, where he ripped his team a new one.
We couldn't do diddly poo offensively. We couldn't make a first down. We couldn't run the ball. We didn't try to run the ball. We couldn't complete a pass. We sucked. The second half, we sucked. We couldn't stop the run. Every time they got the ball, they went down and got points. We got our ass totally kicked in the second half. That's what it boiled down to. It was a horse performance in the second half. Horse. I'm totally embarrassed and totally ashamed. Coaching did a horrible job. The players did a horrible job. We got our ass kicked in that second half. It sucked. It stunk.
Yeah, that's what coaching the New Orleans Saints would do to somebody back in the day. After 10 seasons with 4 playoff appearances, but no playoff victories, Jim Mora decided he had had enough and handed in his resignation to owner Tom Benson. So who did they decide to go with as their new head coach? Well, a bit of an old school hire. Mike Ditka had been out of coaching for a while and decided to give it a go again and became the new Saints head coach in 1997. He was taking over a team that went 3-13 the previous season, so as long as he could show some improvement, he'd be doing a decent job. That first season, they went from 3-13 to 6-10. But in preparing for the 1998 season, during training camp, there was a bit of hazing going on. Now, hazing was a little more accepted back in the day, but
at the New Orleans Saints training camp, it got out of control.
That night, it was scary.
Andy McCullough and 4 of his rookie teammates suffered a brutal initiation in the hallway of their dorm. With pillowcases over their heads, the rookies were forced to run through a line of veterans ready to inflict pain.
So I went out, they grabbed me first. One guy ran up to me and just mugged me right in the stomach. So I buckled a little bit. Then I got back up, it was no problem. Put the pillowcase on my head and ran through the gauntlet. And as I was running through the gauntlet, a couple guys were just punching me and hitting me. After I made it through, they dashed me with some water. And then as I got up, I dazed a little bit. And then I had blood everywhere on my face.
Other rookies got it much worse, especially defensive lineman Jeff Danish.
When Jeff went through, they were on him bad. He was just getting hit with a left, with a right. I think some guy had a trash can and a bag of coins. And as he was running through, I just was like, man, please, let him get through this safely. And as he was going through, his momentum just carried him on through. And as he went through, that's when he almost went through the window. But luckily they had 2 wood bars that were going across the window. So luckily that saved him from going through.
But the broken window caused a gash on Danish's arm. He was taken to the hospital and needed 13 stitches to close the wound. Cam Cleveland, the Saints' second-round pick, told NFL investigators he was hit in the face with a bag of coins. Cleveland missed a week of camp with blurred vision after a fluid sac detached from his retina. Kyle Turley, the Saints' #1 pick in 1998, was also hurt. Danish filed a $650,000 lawsuit against the Saints, 6 veteran players, and an assistant coach seeking damages for, among other things, pain and suffering, medical expenses, and impaired future earnings. The case was eventually settled out of court.
yeah, not the best look for your franchise, especially for new players coming into your system. Speaking of which, the following season, there was only one rookie for the New Orleans Saints that came in, Ricky Williams, after Mike Ditka decided to trade his entire draft The infamous Ricky Williams trade has been discussed over and over and over again, but many fans don't know is that some of the picks went to other teams, and ultimately there was only really one player that panned out from that trade.
Oh, how they laughed when Mike Ditka traded away the entire New Orleans draft to get Ricky Williams. But look how it worked out. Maybe not the way some people might have imagined. LeVar Arrington, obviously a great player. Some of those other guys, not exactly doing major business now.
But it's still a dumb trade in hindsight because you can't trade an entire draft for one player. Now, with all of that earlier drama and this Ricky Williams trade, did it lead to any wins? Of course not. After going 6-10 in his first 2 seasons, Mike Ditka's team completely fell off a cliff in 1999, going 3-13, but worst of all, they lost to the expansion Cleveland Browns on a Hail Mary touchdown.
But Mike Ditka says he's never seen Hail Marys work before. Well, we've seen it. In Atlanta in 78, Atlanta in 79, Minnesota in 88, the Giants last week, and now the Browns this week. Outs to Kevin Johnson, touchdown, unbelievable. This was not even a good expansion team, folks, but they knocked off the Saints.
The reactions from local media were extremely harsh, not just to the head coach, but to owner Tom Benson, as local media were begging the owner to sell the team. And in response,
over the past 10 days, this reporter and other media outlets have called for Saints owner Tom Benson to sell the team to interests that would keep the team in New Orleans. Today, Benson issued a statement saying, among other things, he will not sell the Saints. An excerpt of that statement, and this in capital letters: I will not sell this club nor abandon our goals. Some of the recent comments that have been made by various media sources unfortunately remind me of the lack of support and problems that Bud Adams endured in Houston a few years ago, criticism that eventually resulted in his relocation of the club to Tennessee. I pledge to do my part to avoid a similar outcome in New Orleans.
To add more context, Tom Benson had been the owner for the New Orleans Saints for a while up to this point, but he had other businesses in other cities, including San Antonio.
San Antonio, great city. Really love the Riverwalk. Without a river, it's a dirty little creek. Hey, you on the fire. Victoria's a secret down there.
Which we'll get to later on in the video. Because around this time, it was the beginning of Tom Benson and the city of New Orleans negotiating a new deal, either to have a new stadium or a refurbished Superdome. And if neither of those can happen, the team could possibly relocate. But first, the Saints needed to improve drastically on the field, and did so by hiring a brand new head coach.
Coach Jim Haslett.
Of all the coaches we interviewed, this man was so ready to take this football club and run with it. It was like night and day.
You're going to see an awful lot of dead wood weeded out of this Saints team very, very fast. We're not hiring a celebrity as a head coach here. We're hiring a coach who could probably care less about his image in the spotlight and the media and how often he gets quoted in sound bites and how much he appears on Saturday Night Live.
Look, this is Mike Ditka. Let's get it done, sweetheart.
Ooh, definitely some shade at Mike Ditka towards the end of that clip. But along with new general manager Randy Mueller, Jim Haslett was a freaking miracle worker in his first season as Saints head coach.
Inheriting a 3-13 team, the playoffs seemed far-fetched. But Mueller was active in changing the makeup of the Saints. And during his first training camp, Mueller traded for Aaron Brooks, who at the time was a little-known backup in Green Bay. That first season, everything Mueller touched turned to gold. The Saints captured the NFC West crown that year and defeated the defending Super Bowl champs in the playoffs. For that season, Randy Mueller was named NFL Executive of the Year.
Jim Haslett was also named Head Coach of the Year. They went from 3-13 to 10-6, making the playoffs for the first time since 1992, and went on to score that first historic playoff victory against the Super Bowl defending champions. This is one of the more remarkable turnarounds in NFL history that doesn't get talked about enough. At the time, New Orleans Saints fans could have said that this was the rebirth of the franchise, only that would actually take place 6 years later. Instead, what would follow in the Jim Haslett era would be nothing but inconsistency.
But what was brilliant the previous season turned tarnished in 2001. Off-the-field distractions and a season-ending collapse opened the door for change.
Yeah, 2001 had major distractions. First of all, wide receiver Albert Connell stole from his teammate Deuce McAllister. A little over $4,000 was taken from him. And then there was the rumor that offensive lineman Willie Roof's wife was cheating on him with wide receiver Joe Horn, and that their child was actually Horn's. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, and you can't forget Kyle Turley's infamous helmet toss against the New York Jets. Yeah, a lot was going on with this franchise at the time, and this really led to them losing their final 4 games and missing the playoffs.
Some of the team's most familiar faces were sent packing this offseason for a variety of reasons, not just financial ones.
This football team went through so much, dude. Albert Connell, you had a suit up against him, and you caught on film robbing you, basically. Willie Roth, questions about who's the father. He's out of here now.
I hate Willie left, and I hated it because it all came down to that rumor about me and his wife. No matter what anybody else say, that's one of the reasons he left. I talked to him and I called his wife and I told him, I said, Willie, you know what? I'm a grown man. And I'm not scared to tell nobody what I do if I do that. I said, I did not do that. He believed me. He's the nicest guy in the world. You know what I'm saying? And to stoop that low and go behind his back and sleep with his wife, that's stupid. And I told the football team that, and I meant that.
So it was time for a reset in 2002, but before a game could even be played, the freaking owner decided to fire the general manager who had won Executive of the Year just 2 seasons prior due to style of management. Saints fans were absolutely livid.
The reason for this decision is that I like a certain management style. That style was not evident with Randy and myself. There is nothing else behind it.
Saints fans reacted to the news of Mueller's firing with a mixture of shock and disappointment. They questioned Benson's timing and his motives. Some even said they'll no longer support the team.
Personally, I hate to see it happen because he came in and he brought a lot of stability to the club with a lot of free agents and whatnot.
I think it's crazy. It's the best thing that happened to the Saints in a long time. I mean, they just had one of the best drafts. You know, that's what everybody around the league keeps saying, and now he's fired.
But soon, all of this would be forgotten, because there's an old saying that winning cures all. And during the first half of the 2002 season, the New Orleans Saints were winning a lot of games. They rolled to a 7-2 start with one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. At 7-2, they looked like a lock for the playoffs, but somehow that wasn't the case. Even after averaging 30 points per game at one point, the New Orleans Saints finished the season 9-7 but missed the playoffs, with the biggest loss coming to the Cincinnati Bengals, who had 1 win at the time. To show how even more frustrating this season is, they ended up sweeping the eventual Super Bowl champions from that season, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you thought 2002 was frustrating, here we go again, because 2003 was even more frustrating, as they ended up going 8-8 and missed the playoffs. But the way they missed them was pretty crazy. John Carney ended up missing an extra point after they ended up scoring a touchdown on this insane play. So imagine doing all this work only for your kicker to miss the extra point to send it into overtime.
Extra point by John Carney, and he missed.
No! At the beginning of the 2004 season, the negotiations between Tom Benson and the state of Louisiana over the Superdome renovations were starting to get a tad bit hairy.
As it stands, Louisiana will be just over $7 million short of $15 million due in just less than 40 days. Now, as part of the deal worked out in 2001, if the payment is not received in full on July 1st, after a 75-day grace period, the Saints then have the option to pull out of the contract with the state, including its long-term lease agreement with the Superdome, and leave the city without penalty after the 2004 season.
For now, the bigger problem is finding the $12 million for this year's payment, or we could lose the team.
I'll use the football analogy. The Saints would then become a free agent. They could then look at playing the 05 season somewhere else.
Lawmakers and the governor will have to decide how much playing in this league is worth. Or we could be looking at the Los Angeles or Orlando or Memphis Saints.
In 2004, they once again matched their record from 2003, another 8-8 season, and failed to make the playoffs for the 4th season in a row. But they ended the season on a high note, winning 4 games in a row after being 4-8 at one point. The lowest point of the season was when owner Tom Benson, in a negative way, compared the team to a bunch of high school kids.
I said that's the worst performance I've seen of our club since I've owned them. 20 years. I said they look just like high school kids. That's where they ought to all be playing.
The Saints owner's comments had the locker room buzzing. Watch defensive end Charles Grant's facial expression as we explained what Benson had to say after the loss.
Wow.
Don't mean to catch you off guard there.
Wow.
Jim Haslett decided to steer clear from Benson's remarks.
No, I'm not going to respond to that. He owns the team. He's allowed to say what he wants to say.
But ending the season on a 4-game winning streak was a positive note to close out the year. But little did anyone know that this would be the final season in the Jim Haslett era where the Saints would even play in New Orleans. With all this talk of relocation earlier, it was actually a hurricane that forced the Saints to relocate temporarily. Instead of playing in the Superdome, that season they played most of their games either in Baton Rouge or San Antonio, even playing their first home game of the season at New York Giants Stadium. The storm had made owner Tom Benson pause negotiations for a renovated stadium, and it seemed like the next logical move was the Saints would leave and go to San Antonio due to all of his other businesses being located out here. And even the mayor of San Antonio thought so as well.
But it was more than a game the Saints lost that day in San Antonio. It appeared at the time that the city of New Orleans would lose its franchise. San Antonio Mayor Phil Hardberger, who had been a guest of Tom Benson's at a thrilling game in front of a sold-out Alamo Dome crowd, announced afterward that he would begin negotiations with Benson after the season, and he had been given a great deal of encouragement that a deal could be struck.
The Saints finished the season 3-13, and after 6 seasons as head coach, Jim Haslett was fired. Aaron Brooks at the quarterback position was finally released, and you could say the rebirth of the New Orleans Saints had officially began. Because of all of these moves, the Saints were able to sign a new head coach in Sean Payton, a quarterback it finally believed in Drew Brees, and help rebuild the region after Hurricane Katrina, not just on but off the field. And because of the team's success, there was once again a love affair between the city and its Saints.
Tom Benson did the right thing in coming back. He did the smart thing in changing coaches and quarterbacks, and he did a lucky thing in being able to draft Reggie Bush. Now he's been rewarded by the rekindling of a love affair with this team that has been fanned by design, by fate, and by good fortune into an inferno of passion. Katrina could not blow it out. Katrina could not drown it. It's back, leading the way for a city, a state, and a region that will be too.
It was that roller coaster period of 10 years that led to the Saints we all know and remember. Because of all the team went through during those 10 years, they were finally able to rebuild the proper way and win a Super Bowl in 2009.
I don't think anyone ever imagined something like this could happen. The 20-yard line in the Superdome, and look at it.
The New Orleans Saints, Super Bowl champs for the first time ever.
And just before that season, most importantly, Tom Benson had signed a long-term deal to keep the Saints in New Orleans through the 2020s. And it's safe to say that now football is going to forever stay in New Orleans.